Good evening. I'm Judge Carlos Moore, coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. If you watch this entire story and still don't subscribe, ask yourself what that says about how much you really care about justice. Because this isn't just another case. This is a test of whether we still believe that every life matters equally, a test of whether we still demand answers when the system moves too slowly. And right now, Mississippi is failing that test. This is the story of Nolan Wells, an 18-year-old multi-sport athlete from Ocean Springs High School who went on to play football at Southwest Mississippi Community College. A young man who cooked salmon for his family the night before he disappeared. A son, a brother, a future that was stolen before it ever had a chance to unfold. But here's what they don't tell you in the headlines. Nolan Wells didn't just vanish. He was left behind. And for 11 days and counting, the people who should be demanding answers have been moving at a pace that feels more like obstruction than investigation. That's what we're here to talk about tonight, and I need you to understand something from the very beginning. This case isn't going to solve itself. The system isn't going to fix itself. It takes people who care. It takes people who refuse to look away. So stay with me, because by the time this is over, you'll understand why subscribing to this channel isn't just about supporting us. It's about becoming part of something bigger. It's about saying that Nolan Wells mattered, that his life wasn't just another headline that faded from memory. On July 4th, Nolan Wells did what thousands of young people do every summer. He traveled by boat to Horn Island, a barrier island 10 miles off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. No facilities, no staff, just sand, water, and the kind of freedom that feels infinite when you're 18. He went with a group of friends who'd been drinking since late morning. His friends have described it as one last outing before summer ended. One last moment of freedom before the weight of adulthood settled in. Think about that. Think about being 18, standing on that beach, feeling the sun on your face, believing that the world was yours, believing that you had all the time in the world. Nolan had no idea that this would be his last day on Earth. His friends had no idea that they would be the last people to see him alive. At some point that day, Nolan stayed behind. He'd been spending time with a young woman he'd met on the island. The rest of the group headed back to the mainland by boat. They left him there. Think about what that means. A young man, left alone on an island 10 miles from shore. No phone, no boat, no way back. A friend called the Coast Guard around 11 p.m. that night, worried Nolan hadn't come back. But here's where the timeline starts to fray. The sheriff's office didn't request Coast Guard assistance until around noon the next day. That's a 13-hour gap. You're part of this now. You're the jury. You're the witness. And the question you have to ask yourself is this. If Nolan had been someone else, if he'd looked different, if his family had different connections, if the people in power had seen his face and recognized their own, would that 13-hour gap have existed? Would they have waited? The world looked away for 65 years in the Montana case we covered last week. Don't look away now. Every person who subscribes to this channel is a witness. And witnesses are what the dead deserve. I'll say that again. Witnesses are what the dead deserve. Because right now, in Jackson County, Mississippi, the powers that be are hoping this story fades. They're hoping that by the time you finish watching this video, you'll move on to something else. Something easier. Something that doesn't ask you to care. But we're not going to let that happen. And if you're still watching, neither are you. Nolan's body was found in the water off the island's northwestern tip 2 mornings later. 2 mornings. Think about those 48 hours. Think about his mother, Christine Wansley, posting online pleading for help the night he went missing. Think about the desperation in her voice, the hope that her son would be found alive, the prayer that she would see his face again. After his body was found, she said something that still haunts me. This wasn't how I wanted the world to meet my son. That's the thing about tragedies like this. The world only meets these young people after they're gone. We don't get to know them when they're alive, laughing, planning their futures, dreaming their dreams. We only know them as victims, as hashtags, as cautionary tales. But that's not who Nolan was. He was a son, a brother, a teammate, a young man who cooked salmon for his family the night before he disappeared because he wanted to take care of them. Because that's the kind of person he was. The night before he left, he cooked salmon for his family. That detail matters. It matters because it tells us who Nolan was. It tells us that he was thoughtful, that he was present, that he loved his family and wanted to show it. And now that family is left with nothing but questions. The friends who were on the trip, Treston, Shepard and the others, have given their statements. Treston has said publicly that he believes the truth will come out either way, whether that means someone hurt Nolan or it turns out to have been a tragic accident. But here's the thing about faith in the system. It assumes the system is worthy of that faith. And right now, the system in Jackson County is giving us every reason to doubt. As of this recording, the cause of death still hasn't been determined. No one has been arrested. Day 11, and there has still been no arrest. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Day 11, no arrest. These victims waited decades for the truth in Montana. The least we can do is make sure Nolan's story reaches as far as it deserves. Subscribe, not for us, for him, for every young person who never got to tell their own story. Because here's the reality. If Nolan Wells had been a white young man, do you think there would have been an arrest by now? Do you think the sheriff would be talking about not being rushed? Do you think the district attorney would be hiding from the press? We know the answer to that question. We know it because we've seen it play out over and over again. We know it because the disparity in how these cases are handled isn't a secret. It's a pattern. Sheriff John Lebetier had the audacity to say on Monday that he was not going to be rushed. Well, we're not asking you to be rushed. It's day 11. You've been slow long enough. You need to do your job expeditiously. That's not an unreasonable demand. That's not a rush to judgment. That's a basic expectation of competence, of urgency, of treating a young man's death like it actually matters. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again. And the only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care. So let me ask you something. Are you going to care? Are you going to stay with this case until justice is done? Or are you going to look away like everyone else? I'm going to assume you're still here. I'm going to assume that you care. Because if you didn't, you would have clicked away by now. But you haven't. You're still watching. That means something. Lebetier has since said his office has interviewed more than 60 witnesses, including the 3 friends who were on the boat with Nolan that day. Witnesses. That's a lot of people, that's a lot of interviews. But interviewing someone in their comfortable home, where they can choose to answer or not, where they can control the narrative, is very different from bringing them down to the station and interrogating them. When you take them down to that station and interrogate them against their will, if they do not utilize the advice of their attorney to plead the Fifth, you really start putting some pressure on people. Has anyone been brought down to the station? Has anyone been fully interrogated? Or have they just been asked a few questions in a living room somewhere? That's the distinction that matters. And the fact that we don't know the answer tells you everything. The FBI has been brought in. They're examining digital evidence. Lebetier says their involvement isn't unusual since Horn Island itself is federal land. He's maintained that his team is being diligent, gathering facts rather than working to a timetable. But here's my question. Why did it take 9 days for the FBI to be brought in? 9 days. That's not diligence, that's delay. That's hoping the story goes away. That's hoping the family runs out of energy before the truth comes out. If this case stayed with you, then you already know what you need to do next. Subscribe. Because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. I am man enough to tell you when you're doing something right, but when you're doing something wrong, I'm going to tell you that as well. So, Sheriff Lebetier, I am happy that you finally asked the FBI to come in and help. That's a step in the right direction, but I don't know why it took you 9 days to figure that out. Somehow, someway, a light bulb finally magically appeared, and you have done the right thing in that instance. We are grateful for that. But gratitude doesn't mean we're satisfied. Gratitude doesn't mean we're going to stop asking questions. Think about what it means to have watched this entire story. You've heard Nolan's name. You know what was taken from him. You've seen his mother's pain. If you walk away now without subscribing, you're not just leaving this video, you're leaving his story to fade back into the silence it came from. That's not what you came here to do. Subscribe. Be the reason his name doesn't disappear again. Because there's another player in this story who has been conspicuously absent. The district attorney, Angel Myers McGrath. We had not heard a peep from her all of last week. Since the person had died, she'd been silent. I mentioned on Sunday during my live that we needed to hear from the district attorney. We called for her to do an investigation, and all of a sudden her name comes up on Monday. She's working along with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department doing an investigation. The family has been calling for transparency all this time. So why would you keep them in the dark last week that you were doing an investigation? When somebody who knows how it's done calls you out on Sunday night, early Monday morning, you decide to tell everybody that you're doing an investigation. Thank you, Dar McGrath. We've been wondering what you have been up to the past few days, so now we know. A subscription says you won't let this happen again. The world looked away for 11 days in this case. Don't let it look away now. Every person who subscribes is a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. The FBI has said it's assisting with certain aspects of the case using federal tools and resources, while the Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency. The district attorney met with Nolan's parents for the first time on July 15th, the same day this was recorded. She told them that once the investigation is complete, she'll present the findings to a grand jury, which would decide whether anyone should be indicted. That is a step in the right direction. But is it a step in the right direction because we had to call her hand? Had she planned to do that all along? I had the unfortunate experience of meeting the DA McGrath back in 2019. Let's make sure she's not going to do another sham presentation to the grand jury. We know that you can present things to various grand juries until you get an indictment. The regular saying is, you can indict a ham sandwich with all that evidence. The only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care. And if you're still watching, I know you care. But caring isn't enough. Caring has to mean something. Caring has to lead to action. What happened in 2019? That's a reference to a case that was personal for me, not just professional. My cousin, Tusandianan Sims, was shot and killed by a Moss Point police officer while running away. I represented the family. The same district attorney now handling the Wells case, Angel Myers McGrath, presented that case to a grand jury too, and no indictment came of it. Different case, different facts. But it's the personal history behind my skepticism this time. I know what happens when the system decides not to pursue justice. I've seen it. I've lived it. There's nothing to present to a grand jury if there's an accidental drowning. An accidental drowning under no suspicious circumstances would not require a presentation to a grand jury. The DA could make that call herself. So evidently there is something not clean in the milk. There is something not clean in the milk, and they know it. If you want to see more stories like this, stories where the truth refuses to stay buried, there's one way to make sure you don't miss the next one. It takes 2 seconds. It changes nothing about your life. But it changes everything about whether we can keep making these investigations. Mississippi doesn't require a grand jury presentation for a death ruled a simple accident. The county coroner said there were no obvious signs of trauma when the body was recovered. But investigators requested a full autopsy specifically to rule foul play in or out. Investigators have said publicly they don't suspect foul play, but the family disputes that conclusion. And the official cause of death still hasn't been finalized. That's the gap. That's the space where the truth is supposed to live. And right now, that space is empty. We are going to keep our feet on their necks. We're going to keep applying pressure because pressure brings results. Pressure burst pipes who stayed until the end. You heard Nolan's name, you heard his mother's pain. Now do the only thing that makes sense, subscribe, because he deserves to be remembered. And we can't do that without you. I heard attorney Crump mention that Nolan Wells' cell phone will be jointly examined by his independent person as well as the state's investigators simultaneously. That's what I understood it to be. I think that's very wise because you do not want to give that cell phone with all this valuable information to those folks unsupervised. That arrangement is real. Crump's legal team and the district attorney's office agreed to a joint inspection of Wells's phone, investigators from both sides examining it together. The family has said messages were missing when the phone was returned to them after friends who were on the trip had held onto it. Crump has also said cell phone video shows some kind of argument on the island before Nolan disappeared, though witnesses disagree on whether Nolan was actually involved or whether it was even his voice on the recording. This is the same boat mentioned earlier, the one that headed back to the mainland without Nolan. NBC News has since obtained audio of a distress call its passengers made to a private towing company, placed around 4 p.m. on July 4th. roughly an hour after Nolan was last seen with the group. The boat had a bilge pump failure and was taking on water. Everyone aboard confirmed they were safe. It was eventually pulled from the water that evening. According to an account one friend's family shared publicly, Nolan had already chosen to stay behind that afternoon, planning to come back to the mainland later with a different group. He never did. And what happened to that plan has never been explained. Subscribe. Not for us, for Nolan, for every victim who never got to tell their own story. Because here's the truth, you didn't just watch a documentary, you participated in an investigation. You followed the clues. You waited for the answer. You felt the weight of 11 days of silence. And now you're invested. You're part of this community. And if you want to see the next case, if you want to continue this journey of uncovering truths that refuse to stay buried, there's one way to make sure you don't miss it. It takes 2 seconds. It changes nothing about your life, but it changes everything about whether we can keep digging. The audio doesn't answer what happened to him afterward, but it's the clearest documented account yet of his final hours. Authorities have said they believe he stayed behind voluntarily. The family and their attorney have challenged parts of that account and pointed to inconsistencies between witnesses. If you've got a theory on what happened in those missing hours, drop it in the comments. I'll be tracking this one as it develops. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again. And right now, I need you to make that promise. There's been a lot of talk about the Chief Mississippi Medical Examiner, Stacey Turner. You may recall there was a body found at Delta State of a black boy hung in a tree not too long ago, and she did not find any foul play. So that's the same person who has done the autopsy for the state in this instance. So I see why Attorney Crump and the family have an independent person doing the autopsy. I happen to know a great pathologist who's a good friend of mine in Washington, D.C., and if rumor is correct, he may have been the one selected to do the independent autopsy. I have every bit of confidence in that young man, and I know that he will get down to the bottom of the truth, and if he says it, you can take it to the bank. The independent autopsy was commissioned by the family, partly funded by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick, and conducted in Washington, D.C. It was originally expected within days, but flight disruptions delayed getting Nolan's body there. By the time this was being put together, results still hadn't been released. The state's own findings, including toxicology, can take several weeks to come back. This investigation, because no case stays cold forever, and the next ghost might be closer than you think. I'm concerned that since no one has been officially declared to be suspects, but the case is now serious enough for the FBI to be brought in, for the DA to be looking into it and agreeing to present all the evidence to a grand jury, that there evidently are people still of interest that may become suspects, but they are giving them too much time, too much freedom. The normal thing would be to arrest them and to set bail so that they would not be a flight risk. I will say that again, so that they would not be a flight risk. You have people, just from what the media has been sharing, that may be very well off. And we are on day 11. Are we giving them time to escape the country? Have their passports been confiscated? If these folks leave this country and never return, if they flee to a country where they do not extradite them back to the United States, that will stink to high heaven. And the people in charge would have been complicit, because if they have not considered that, I'm here to put them on notice. As a former judge in Mississippi, you have to think about the flight risk. At last check, no one has been named a suspect in this case, and no charges have been filed against anyone. Has the boat been seized? Have you even presented evidence to a judge to at least seize that boat for any substance? We need answers. These victims waited for justice. Nolan Wells is still waiting. The least we can do is make sure his story reaches as far as it deserves. Subscribe, not for us, for him. It's just as easy to do a drive-by, Facebook detectives. Give me that answer. Drive by the house again and tell me if that boat's still out there. Is there any yellow tape? Has it been secured? We have the court of public opinion. And right now, in the court of public opinion, the state of Mississippi is losing. The people are demanding a thorough investigation. And they are demanding that justice be dealt swiftly, just as it would have been done had the roles been reversed. Besides the people that were identified in the photo, besides the young lady of interest, the girlfriend, a potential person he may have been interested in, what are the names of the friends who had the other boat? I have never heard those names come forward. This is where that earlier distinction matters. The friends who were with Wells on Horn Island and the young woman he reportedly spent time with haven't been named by investigators, and this video won't be naming them either. Some of them have said publicly they've since received threats, and the FBI has confirmed it's investigating threats connected to the case that crossed state lines. If this case stayed with you, if any part of this story hit the way it hit us, then you already know what you need to do next. Subscribe. Because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. Attorney Eric Hurd is leading the family's independent investigation team, made up of former law enforcement and federal agents. Lisa Park, a senior attorney at Crump Law, has also represented the family. The case has drawn attention well beyond Mississippi. The NAACP, the Congressional Black Caucus, and Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson have all called for a full and transparent investigation. Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton held a press conference in New York with the family. Crump invoked Mississippi's history directly, citing the killing of Emmett Till. Nolan was part of a mostly white friend group that day, a detail that's become part of the wider public debate. Some officials and some of Nolan's own friends have pushed back on how much race has been read into the case. Others say the disparity in urgency is exactly the point being made. That attention has come with a real cost. Crump's team has had to publicly clarify that photos they've reposted to help solicit tips aren't confirmed facts. AI-generated fake videos of Nolan's mother have also spread. It's part of why this video has stuck to what's been confirmed on the record and left out everything that hasn't. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again, and I need you to make that promise right now, because Nolan's case is still open, and it won't close until we get answers. Has anyone been brought down to the station and fully interrogated? It's one thing to interview somebody in their comfortable home. They voluntarily enter and they voluntarily give you the interview. But when you take them down to that station and interrogate them against their will, if they do not utilize the advice of their attorney to plead the fifth, you really start putting some pressure on people. Those interviews mentioned earlier. What hasn't been made public is whether any of them happened formally at the station or informally elsewhere. That's the exact distinction I keep returning to. I still have my concerns. Yes, the people in Jackson County, the powers that be, have done enough that we are not going to call for a mass presence on Saturday in Jackson County. We're going to delay calling for that. At this time, we have formed a new group, Dads for Justice, and because of the outcry from the ladies, we are also founding an auxiliary group, Moms for Justice, because we are all concerned about our kids and their safety, and if something deadly happens to them, we are concerned about getting justice. The Dads for Justice will be in Jackson County meeting on Sunday evening. We're going to have a private meeting on Sunday evening that we're not going to announce the location. You stayed until the end, you heard Nolan's name, you heard his mother's pain. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, because he deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. In the days that followed, I helped launch 2 advocacy groups built around the case, Dads for Justice, and in response to interest from mothers following the story, Moms for Justice. These groups will prioritize private meetings with officials over public demonstrations, at least for now. We're starting in Jackson County because of this Nolan Wells tragedy. That's where it occurred. But we're not going to stop there. We are building a movement, not a moment. Most dads have the same persona. It's hands off. You don't mess with a man's kids, you don't mess with a woman's kids. So we are putting Nolan in the same vein as we would our own blood kids. It's Dads for Justice, because it may be one son today, but it could easily be our son or daughter tomorrow. I've framed this case in personal terms throughout my updates, drawing on my own experience as a father. It's a pattern that shows up in cases like this one. When an investigation stalls, parents and community members often end up filling the advocacy role no one else has. We will be there as a group at the funeral, a celebration of the life of Nolan Wells, on Monday morning in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. We'll be there. The world looked away from this case for too long. Don't look away now. Subscribe, be a witness, because witnesses are what the dead deserve. As of when this was finalized, funeral services were scheduled for Monday, July 20th at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation that morning, followed by the service, then a repast at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Reverend Al Sharpton was set to officiate, with costs covered by Tyler Perry. Nolan's mother has said she wants it to be a celebration of her son's life. She has repeatedly asked anyone planning to demonstrate over the case to keep it peaceful, which she said is what her son would have wanted. A day after this live stream, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves addressed the case for the first time. He said he personally knows Sheriff LeBetier and confirmed the state's autopsy was handled by the medical examiner's office under the Department of Public Safety. Between the boat audio, the witness count, and the governor weighing in, this case moved fast right afterward, and it will likely have moved further still by the time you're watching this. This man's life mattered, and we will not stop until full justice is reached. As of July 18th, the investigation into Nolan Wells's death remains open. No cause of death has been confirmed, no suspects have been named, and no charges have been filed. The Jackson County District Attorney has said she will present the case to a grand jury once the investigation concludes. So here's where we land. If this case stayed with you, if that last detail hit the way it hit us, go ahead and hit like, subscribe. Drop a comment telling us which moment stopped you cold. Was it the 13-hour gap? The missing phone messages? The 9-day wait for the FBI? The mother's words? We want to know. Because here's the truth. You didn't just watch a video. You participated in an investigation. You followed the clues. You waited for answers. You felt the weight of 11 days of silence. And now, you're invested. You're part of this community. And if you want to see the next case, if you want to continue this journey of uncovering truths that refuse to stay buried, there's one way to make sure you don't miss it. It takes 2 seconds. It changes nothing about your life, but it changes everything about whether we can keep digging. Subscribe to this channel. Because no case stays cold forever, and the next ghost might be closer than you think. Subscribe to see Part 2. See how this plays out once the grand jury actually convenes. Nolan Wells deserves justice, his family deserves peace, and we deserve to know the truth. Subscribe, not for us, for Nolan, for every young person who never got to tell their own story, for every family that's still waiting for answers, for every mother who had to bury her child without knowing why. The world looked away from Nolan Wells for 11 days. Don't let it look away any longer. Don't let his name fade into the silence that the system wants him to disappear into. You have the power to change that, right now, with one click. Not because we asked you to, but because you know deep down that this is what justice looks like. It looks like people who care, people who refuse to forget, people who understand that a life lost is not just a headline, it's a son, a brother, a future that was stolen. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He cooked salmon for his family the night before he disappeared because he loved them, because he wanted to take care of them, because that's who he was, and now he's gone. And the people who should be demanding answers are moving at a pace that feels more like obstruction than investigation. But we're not going to let that stand. We're not going to let his story fade. We're not going to let the system win by simply waiting us out. We are building a movement, not a moment. And movements are built by people who care enough to stay, who care enough to subscribe, who care enough to be part of something bigger than themselves. That's what this is about. That's what you're signing up for when you click that button. You're not just subscribing to a channel, you're joining a community of people who refuse to let injustice go unanswered, who refuse to let the dead be forgotten, who refuse to let the system decide which lives matter and which ones don't. So I'm asking you, not for me, not for this channel, for Nolan, for his mother, for every family that's still waiting for answers. Subscribe. Because no case stays cold forever, and the next ghost might be closer than you think. We'll see you in the next one.